الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده والصلاة والسلام على خير الأنام وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. إننا نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير والحث والتمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسول الله ابتغاء مرضات الله وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. Praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praise it's worthy of beneficent bestowal of bounties and favours, and we ask our Lord Most High to send beneficial prayers and salutations upon the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi. So it continues the Imam nafa'ana bihi wa bikum radiyallahu anhu wa ankum fasl wa alayka بالمبادرة إلى أداء ما فرض الله عليك من الحج والعمرة عند الاستطاعة. It's the beginning of the chapter. Which page is it?
Page 74.
74. The books didn't come today, or?
Yeah, they're here. One's in the folding.
There's PDFs and whatever, like you should have a copy of the book if you come to the classes. No, please.
Hasten to perform the obligations of Hajj, pilgrimage and Umrah, the smaller pilgrimage, as soon as you're able. Beware of postponing them while able, for you may lose the ability or die while this duty is still incumbent, and you will then be deemed neglectful.
Alright, that's good. So he says, وَإِيَّاكَ وَالتَّأَخُّرِ بَعْدَ حُصُولِهَا فَرُبَّمَا عَجِزْتَ أو مُتَّ بعد التمكن فيستقر الوجوب في ذمتك وتعد به مقصرا. So the Imam is again alerting our attention to certain aspects of the faith and really the pillars of the faith. So last time was the fasting, and this time is the pilgrimage, the Hajj. The qasd, Hajj meaning the qasd, the azm, the resolution to go to the Arabian Peninsula and to perform the nusuk or the ibadat, the different aspects of the Hajj. And he says, مَا فَرَضَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ. So it's not just a farida, it's a farida as the Imam says, but it's a rukn. It's a fundamental aspect, as the Prophet of Allah said, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ, that Islam was built upon 5 foundations, 5 aspects to it, that without those things, there's no semblance of the deen, and there's no reality of the deen, because we don't have a foundation. You can't climb and see the top of the Eiffel Tower or the Burj or whatever the thing's called in UAE without the foundation. No matter how high one thinks they're going to progress, without having a foundation, one can't reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why they call them the goofy Sufis, the people who are on a spiritual path, but they've got no knowledge. You go to their gatherings, they're smoking in the gathering, they don't even pray properly, they don't pray in the masjid. What's going on? You're person. You think you're claiming to be a people of tasawwuf, which is kind of like the people of, without all the weird definitions out there, but the people who seek to have a spiritual connection to Allah Azza wa Jalla and have an elevated spirit that's connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Basically that's what it means. So a person can't reach the lofty heights without having a solid base. In anything, ask an engineer. If you want to build a 50-story building, you have to have a certain type of structure in the foundation, certain types of metals, certain types of concretes, and it has to be built in a particular way to be able to hold 50 stories, however many tons that is. Roughly, what's a building 50 stories away?
I don't know. It's too much.
Like 100,000 tons, 100,000 tons?
It's very big, but the bigger the taller buildings, the bigger the base has to be.
Right? So in anything is like that. A tree, if it's going to be a super tall tree, if the trunk isn't thick, it's not going to work. A person got very, very, very skinny legs can't have a huge big body on a very skinny legs. The person's going to be unbalanced. It's the same with the deen. The person who wants to progress and reach Allah Azza wa Jal, if they don't have a firm base, a firm foundation, founded firstly in the arkan. In other words, if their salat, firstly their belief in Allah isn't straight, their salat isn't proper, there's no reality to their prayer, They're not really interested in their zakat. Because remember, before that we were doing zakat. Were we not? Yeah? Maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, we were. Alright? So now, it's on Hajj. So if these foundational aspects aren't firm in an individual, that person's not going to reach Allah. Then, alhamdulillah, they'll be Muslimin. And we know from the Prophet ﷺ, the Bedouins came and said, Ya Rasulullah, amanna. He said, don't say that. We said, Allah, we became Muslims. It's in the Qur'an. We became mu'mins. We became true believers. He said, no, don't say that. Say we became Muslims, because the reality of Iman hasn't entered into your hearts yet. And the reality of Iman is the perfection of those 5 pillars through the belief, first and foremost. But the 5 pillars have to be there. If one's not practicing, what they say, what is al-Iman? Now, وَقَرَ فِي الْقَلْبِ وَصَدَّقَهُ الْعَمَلِ. What's the definition of faith? That which is firmly entrenched in one's heart and is proved by one's actions. So without having a firm foundation, and not just a physical foundation, but an intellectual and spiritual foundation and attachment to these separate pillars, then one can't reach the lofty levels of the pious predecessors. You can't do that. It doesn't work. The Sahaba, when they learned Qur'an, they didn't just go and sit and learn. They learned 10 verses and applied it in their lives, understood it, applied it, and they came back and learned another 10. Memorized, in other words, another 10. So this is the base part of it. And he says, عند الاستطاعة. عند الاستطاعة, what does he say in English?
Why you able?
Why you have the capacity, right? The istita'a is closer to capacity. So if you've got your own copy there, mark it or note that it's capacity. So who knows what the capacity is for Hajj? What's the istita'a? وَحَجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنْ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. Who knows what the capacity is? So we're all Muslims, Mahag? And we're all mu'min, inshallah. Say inshallah. Do we know what the istita'a is?
Having enough money to go.
Okay?
Have to be sane.
Alright? So the physical characteristics and requirements. That's one, sanity. The other one is the financial, what is the financial is twofold. What is it?
You leave money for your family once you leave,
Right?
and but you have enough money as well.
Alright, enough money for what?
Your debts have to be paid off first.
Okay, that's the third one. But the two main ones are that you got enough money to look after those who you're responsible for. For a sister, that's nobody but herself. Right? Shar'an, she's not responsible for anyone. She might be doing extra good deeds, and she might be responsible for someone. But Shar'an, she's not. Okay? And then the capacity to the financial capacity to go to the haram and return and stay there however many days it requires, and to return. And another one, debts and that, it's kind of extra, but yeah, you've got to take care of you. Alright? And the physical aspect is what? That you can what?
You can perform.
Right? That you can actually go there. So if your person's bedridden and they can't get up, well, there's no the Hajj isn't there's no obligation for them to attend Hajj. There's no obligation for that person. These days, if you're a quadriplegic, paraplegic, there is facilities. They've got handicap stuff, handicap facilities on the aeroplanes and in the buses, and then even when you get to the haram, there's facilities for people who are handicapped. So in that way, they're not exempt. But if that person's got some sort of an illness where they need particular medical attention, or whatever it might be, and that medical attention can't be afforded to that individual on the way or there at the haram, then it's not an obligation for that individual to go. Alright? So are we clear on that?
Safety of the path.
And then also, that the path has to be clear. Like if there's a war or whatever, and you're going to get blown up in the war, then you don't have to go. If there's gangsters or whatever, wild animals, flooding, whatever the case might be, then the farida for that period of time is inapplicable, it doesn't apply. Alright, so they're the things that we need to consider. And the Imam, he knows us, he knows our mentality. It says, وَإِيَّاكَ, beware. What does it say?
Beware.
It says, beware. Right? Fadl. He says, beware. Right? It says, in other words, be cautious. Iyaka is like it's almost an admonition. It's almost an admonition. It's like, Iyaka, like, watch out. Watch out. In that kind of a tone. Like, what are you doing? Be careful. He says, be careful. وَالتَّأَخُّرِ بَعْدَ حُصُولِهَا. Okay? So he's talking about once you have the husul, tahassul, what does it say in English? Why you're able? وَالتَّأَخُّرِ
Postponing them while you're able.
Okay? So postponing, in other words, when you have that financial capacity, both at your place of residence to go and return, right? And you've got the physical capacity to do so, and the path is clear, you've got the money, that becomes wajib on you now. Or fard, more correctly. It becomes fard. So I want you to let that sink in. I want you to really focus and try and understand what that means. That means that your and my attendance at Hajj, and there's a lot of other rules, but once you become valid, of course, that's everyone in this room, I imagine, you know that once you become mature, Islamically speaking, have mental capacity and legal capacity more correctly, then it's an obligation to go. So this situation where culturally we want to go to Hajj when we're like 50, that becomes a person, when Allahu falls into a very, very dangerous territory. And the Imam will talk about it in a sec. Maybe we should read it, all of it, and then we can talk about it, because it all relates to each other. It says, وَإِيَّاكَ وَالتَّأَخُّرِ بَعْدَ حُصُولِهَا رُبَّمَا عَجَزْتَ أو عَجِزْتَ أو مُتَّ بعد التمكن فيستقر الوجوب في ذمتك وتعد به مقصرا. وقال صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم من لم تحبسه حاجة ظاهرة أو مرض حابس أو سلطان جائر ومات ولم يحج فليمت إن شاء يهوديا وإن شاء نصرانيا.
The Prophet has said, may blessings and peace be upon you, the one who is not hindered by an obvious necessity, a disabling sickness, or a tyrannical ruler, and who dies without having performed the Hajj, let him die a Jew if he so chooses, or a Christian if he so chooses.
What do you think? Is that heavy duty or what? So the person, the whole life they're fasting, their whole life they're praying, their whole life they're giving zakat, and they had the capacity to attend Hajj, right? Financial capacity, and the path was clear, and they had the physical capacity, and what they do? They delayed. They delayed. That person who calls himself a Muslim, they said, whatever. What's the excuses we hear? Oh, I want to marry my son or my daughter off. Oh, I'm not married yet. Where's that come into play? I'm not married yet. No? I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm waiting for that to happen. Or when my kids have kids, I can't leave my kids behind. There's a classic scenario, Lebanese style. Oh, I can't leave my kids behind. 2 weeks later, here they went to Lebanon, left their kids behind. Well, how come you can't leave them behind when you're going to Hajj? But if you want to go and see your family or go on holiday or whatever, you're happy to live. So these are the common excuses. They're not my words. It's not my deen. It's the Prophet, he said it. So the person who doesn't have a valid excuse, if you want to read it again, it's a very good actual translation of the hadith.
The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who was not hindered by an obvious necessity.
Okay? The one who wasn't prevented, in other words, by something that's clear, something they had to do, which included,
or a disabling sickness.
Right? So a person, not any sickness, a sickness that doesn't allow a person, if you want, move closer so the two of you can have a look, inshallah. Alright? Everyone should be looking at, I don't know what's going on with you guys, but everyone should try and be looking at a text or online or whatever. Have you got a copy that you're looking at? Have you got it on the thing? My sister, they'll work it out. Alright? So unless a person is disabled by sickness, in other words, unable to attend for whatever reason of sickness, then they've got no reason. They haven't got a valid excuse in the Sharia. They haven't got a valid excuse to go. Or, alright, a tyrannical ruler means a ruler that doesn't allow people to go to Hajj. So if your ruler's a tyrant, but he still allows you to go to Hajj, then that's not what this implies. The implication is the ruler's saying, right, no one can go. And they might make that law sometime in this country. They're already stopping people from going overseas. They're already, taking away people's citizenships. You don't know. At the moment, alhamdulillah, it doesn't apply. But if it did apply, that we weren't allowed to go to Hajj if you were from the country or whatever, then the Hajj wouldn't be wajib anymore, or whichever country that may be. He says, and that person dies that had the capacity to attend the Hajj financially, physically. The path was clear and they die. What does it say? What does it say? So that person can choose whichever faith they want. They can pick. Oh, how good's that? Pick whichever faith you want, but it can't be Islam. It's either Christianity or Judaism. And it's not to degrade either one of those two faiths. That's not the point of the hadith. The point is saying that the person hasn't reached the stage of Islam, because neither of those two faiths have Hajj as part of their religious rites. So a person who had the capacity to go to Hajj but didn't go, when a'udhu billah, and they die, they're not counted amongst the fold of Muslims. That's like I said, it's not my deen. I'm not making this up. It's the prophetic tradition, and it's written in your text and in the Arabic version of the event. So these kind of excuses, people are waiting. Or one brother, they asked, why don't you go? He goes, I'm not ready yet. What does not ready yet means? It means he wants to do haram. That's what it means. He's got money. No offense, in Australia it's 10, 12 grand. There's not that many people. I mean, most of us, with the exception of probably me, are quite young, so maybe we don't have that kind of money. But when you're 30, 35, and you're working, it's not that hard in Australia to put $12,000 aside. It's not as difficult as it is in other countries. So there are plenty of wealthy people that don't go. Plenty of people that are not ready. What does not ready mean? It means he wants to go do haram. He's not happy with changing his life, because we know that when we go to the Hajj, that's it. It's over. Whatever corruption was going on, whatever ill will, whatever untoward activity, has to stop. Has to anyway, but more so when a person declares themselves as a person that's given up their life for Allah Azza wa Jal and completes that life journey. So I don't recommend that if people are not going to Hajj or whatever, that you tell them they're going to die a Christian or a Jew. But it's for you to know for yourself and for you to encourage others. And like we said, we're still 6 months out, a bit less than that now from Ramadan, and we're only about 8 months out from the Hajj season. So the person who wants to go, probably it's even too late now, I don't even know to put your name, because there's a big backlog and whatever, they're still doing construction at the Haram and that thing. So if you've got the capacity, if you've got the money sitting there, you've got no excuse. And you're financially able, you're physically able, and at the moment there are no impediments to go into to Arabia, to the Arabian Peninsula, to go to Mecca. So there's no excuse. And that applies for the people around you who you can convince, and the people around you who you can influence, that you should be telling them, if they haven't gone to the Hajj already, that it's an obligation for them to do so, and it's a rukn of the deen. So he says, وَعَلَيْكَ عِنْدَ الْقُدْرَةِ بِالتَّطَوَّعِ بِالْحَجِّ وَالْعُمْرَةِ كَغَيْرِهَا مِنَ الْقَرَبَاتِ.
Also, whenever able to perform supererogatory acts of Hajj and Umrah, just as you perform any other supererogatory devotion.
Alright, and then he also continues, maybe we'll continue, he said, قَدْ وَرَدَ عَنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى أَنَّهُ قَالَ إِنَّ عَبْدًا قَدْ صَحَّحْتُ جِسْمَهُ وَأَكْثَرْتُ مَالَهُ تأتي عليه 5 أعوام ولا يغدو علي لعبد سوء. الحديث بمعناه.
It has been handed down that God, the Exalted, has said, any servant whose body I have made healthy and whose wealth I have made abundant, and who lets 5 years go by without coming to me is an evil servant indeed.
All right. Again, it's pretty heavy duty stuff, but that's the reality. And what the Imam is talking about here is those who it's easy for them to go. So there's some people who are extremely wealthy, they've got plenty of money. And maybe that's not us, maybe that is us, I don't know, but some people are. So that individual needs to have that connection. And that's really what it's about. The 5 years shouldn't pass. And now look, another factor to consider is that Hajj these days in Australia is becoming a lot harder. Back in the day, I remember when I was young, you could just decide, next week, 2 months out or a month out from Hajj or a week out from Hajj, that's it. You could get your ticket and no problems, you can go. But now with all the quotas and all the construction or whatever that's going on in the Haram, it's a lot harder. So you've got to declare beforehand. And then people from other countries as well, it's a lottery. like where there's a lot of Indonesia, India, these kind of places, you put your name in a lottery, and then even that, and if they pull out as many as their quota is, that's given by the government there in Mecca, the governance, and then if you get it, you get it. If you don't, now even what they're doing is they're saying that the first option is for those above, for example, 50 years of age, 60 years of age, 70 years of age, to make sure they can get. And don't think it's like us, they save the money in a year or half a year. It takes them a whole lifetime to save it. So, in that regard, that maybe not Hajj every 5 years. And now that's what they're saying, I think. You can't go, you have to make an application once every 5 years. You can't go any more than that anyway. So in Australia it's a little bit easier, but there are people that haven't gone. So at least Umrah. Umrah you can go any time of the year. The only time you can't go in Umrah is in Ashhur al-Hajj. And even then you can, but they won't give you a visa anyway. So technically you can, but they won't give you a visa. So that means if you've got the financial capacity, the word holiday comes to mind. If you want to go on a holiday, is this where you should go? And what did the Prophet say? Only two places that you should be tightening your, in other words, packing your bags for, and one is Mecca and one is Medina. So if you want to go on a holiday, go to Fiji or Vanuatu or wherever you want to go, Mauritius or wherever it is. Before or after, go to the Umrah. Do your Umrah. Go there, and especially if you haven't gone in a while, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money and not go there. Especially if you're in Australia where it's so far away from everything else. You're going to spend minimum $2,000 just to leave the country without hotels and whatever. And if you do it as a package, but don't forget Umrah tickets, Umrah visas are a bit expensive. They're probably about $5,000 these days. So you got to factor that into the equation. You got to have at least that $5,000. But if you're going to go on a holiday and you're going to spend more than $5,000, then really you should be going there, especially if it's been 5 years. If you're spending less, all right, it's a different story. If you're going in Australia, again, it's a different story. But you got to find out what the pricing is and go accordingly. But at least if you've got the capacity, once every 5 years. And then he talks about it, the reasoning behind it. He says, وَعَلَيْكَ عِنْدَ إِرَادَتِكَ الْمَسِيرُ إِلَى الْحَجِّ بِتَعَلُّمِ وَاجِبَاتِهِ وَسُنَنِهِ وَأَذْكَارِهِ.
When you decide to go on Hajj, you must learn its necessity, acts its sunnah, and its invocations.
Alright? So, that's the next prerequisite. If you want to do something, you got to understand it. You want to drive a car, you got to read the book, you got to know how the road rules, you got to know how to drive, and you start learning how to drive after you get your L's, then they let you on the road. If you don't have your L's, your learner's permit, they don't let you on the road because you don't know the road rules. No different when it comes to the Hajj, that you need to know the wajibat, because there's arkan, there's wajibat, and there's sunan, the manasik, they're the different aspects of the Hajj. So you need to know what they are. And also the adhkar, the different dua you make when you see the Kaaba for the first time, what you say. When you go past the Bab al-Yamani, when you go Rukn al-Yamani, when you go past all the different al-Iraqi, al-Shimal, all the different ones, all the different ad'iyah that you say, all the different, when you're making your sa'i, what you should be saying. When you do the rajm, what you should be saying, the throwing of the stone. So this adds flavour to it, the adhkar. Okay, the fiqh of it is good. It's not only good, it's an obligation. But the adhkar, the remembrances you make in particular spots, that enlightens one's Hajj. That elevates one's status because it gives one a connection to it. Or Umrah, as the case might be. وبتعلم أدلة القبلة ورخص السفر وآدابه وما يقال فيه من الأذكار.
You must also learn how to locate the Qibla, the concessions allowed during a journey and the associated proprieties and the invocations to be said during it.
Okay, so again, there's other aspects that aren't directly related to the Hajj. Firstly, being in other words the manasik, is to find the Qibla. Because if you've ever been to Mecca, there's all mountains around. So as soon as you move, now they've got that big, grotesque tower there that you can see pretty much from anywhere. At night they shine a big laser as well, so you can see where the haram is. So it's a lot easier these days. But to work out where it is, because you can't say it's east, you can't say it's north, because you're somewhere around where it is. So you've got to find out where it is. Okay, and the dispensations, is that what it says in Safar?
Concessions.
You get the concessions or dispensations when you're travelling. because there's different rules when you're traveling for prayers, for all the different aspects, the khuf, all these things. In other words, the leather socks that you wear. And also the etiquettes, how does one travel? The different aspects of traveling, when you're traveling with people, when you're traveling on your own, the different aspects that are associated with that. One must know that because, guess what? That's part of the Hajj. La rafath, wala fusuq, wala jidal. There's no rafath, any sexual activity. Fusuq, being saying foul things, and jidal, argumentation. If a person does that, guess what happens to their Hajj? It's gone. All the rewards out of it, they still get the farid, the rukun's gone, it's ticked off the box, but there's no reward. It's like kind of going to TAFE. You go to TAFE, you get your result, it says complete or incomplete. I find that quite difficult to bear if you're a good student, and that's where you get complete or incomplete. So it's a little bit like that if you don't have good rewards. But if you've got the rewards there, then you get high distinctions and credits and those other things that make you feel good when you see them. ولا تجعل قصدك الحج مشتركا بينه وبين التجارة بل ينبغي أن لا يصحبك شيء من متاع الدنيا إلا ما تقصد إنفاقه في مدة سفرك.
Do not intend both Hajj and commerce at the same time. You should only take such worldly goods as you intend to spend on the road. Imam?
That's all right. It says وإن كان لابد فاجتنب أخذ ما يشغلك عن أداء المناسك على وجهها وتعظيم شعائر الله كما ينبغي. This is the end of the
If you must trade, then avoid anything that may distract you from the correct performance and the due respect for the rights ordained by God.
Alright, so that's another aspect. For us it's a little bit different, it's the opposite of that. So in the old days they would trade because they wanted to get enough money, keep the money, plus it was a season. Still a season now, so if you go to Makkah, and probably now it's all like Hajj, mashallah, so much people go there. But in the old days, if you went to Umrah, like one time I went to Umrah back in the days, there was basically no one there. And there was only a few hundred people making tawaf, and the restaurants were empty, and the shopkeepers, they were dying to sell you something. Whatever you say, they'd say, just take it. But when you go to the time of Hajj, if it costs $1, in the time of Hajj it costs 20 or 30 or 50 or 100, as much as they can fleece you for, because it's the season. So people used to take their items, their goods from whatever country they came from that were unique in Mecca, so they can sell it there to the other Muslims and things like that. Now, today with the technology and imports and exports and containers and China and all this business, everything comes from China in the Hajj nearly anyway. So you look at it, the tasbih comes from the clocks, they all come from China. They got, the writing of Qur'an and whatever, but they're all from there anyway. So for us it's the opposite, that we shouldn't go there. How many people do it? When you go to Hajj, just see them, they spend all their time in the shopping. And then not only when they spend all their time in the shopping, when they come back to their hotel room, they do a full conference, a breakdown of where they went, where they shopped, how much they spent, how much they saved, how much it cost in Australia, what the difference was between the dollar and the real, the Aussie dollar and the real. And not only that, they're giving directions. Go to this spot, go around there, if he tells you 100, tell him 50, blah, blah, blah. They spend all their time, and it sounds funny, but that's what you hear in the hotel rooms. It's what people are talking about. So, what are you going to do there? You're going to go, oh, there's no problem, and that's what he says. He goes, if you have to trade, do it when it's not that time to do it. When it's not that time to do the manasik. In other words, Arafah, you shouldn't be doing any trade except buying whatever you need to eat. In Muzdalifah, all those, especially those main ones. Mina, maybe it's a bit of a relaxing time. All you do is relax. All right, maybe go buy something. Certainly not Arafah, and the days before that. So that it shouldn't interfere with your worship at the Hajj, the specific worship that a person has when they go to Hajj. And like I said, it sounds like it's far-fetched and that it's fanciful and things like that. But the reality of it is that for us, the Hajj has got so many aspects to it, and in its essence, it's a return to Allah Azza wa Jal, and it's a ta'ari an dunya, that a person becomes naked in terms of or gives up dethrones themselves, declothes themselves from all the affairs of the world. Anyone who's gone to Hajj will know. They forget everything. They forget everyone, not just everything, everyone. All they think about is Allah Azza wa Jal. So in that sense, that the going to Allah Azza wa Jal and the Hajj, that's what the connection's to. It's not just to say, oh, I'm going to Hajj. Okay, yes, we're going to Hajj. Not just to see the Kaaba. Yes, we're going to see the Kaaba. But it's in perspective, what it's about is the connection to the manasik. Right? That when you go there, Arafah, that's where Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, he met Sayyidina Hawa, Eve, Adam and Eve, that's what they met. And it's a reflection of the Hashr also, of the day when all of us will be gathered under in the throne of Allah on the Day of Judgment, basically. That's what it looks like when you go there. Now there's plastic bottles and stuff everywhere, but in the old days, they didn't have those issues. All it is just people. Then there's the idea of equality, that all the Muslims are the same. It doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor, or wealthy or powerful or otherwise. They're all wearing, especially the men, they're all wearing the ihram, and they all look the same. And there's no difference between someone who's of a good lineage or average lineage, or someone who's from a particular race or another type of race, black or white or Arab or non-Arab or whatever the case might be. There's no delineation in those matters whatsoever. Everyone's equal. And even things like the staying in Muzdalifah, the fact that it's a transitional point. It's a transitional point between Arafah and Mina, and that sense of transiency in the world, that it's not a permanent stay that we have in this world, that we're only travelling through, and we've got a purpose that we have to achieve, and once we achieve that purpose, then we'll attain Allah Azza wa Jall's pleasure, and we'll attain ourselves that contentment and that happiness that we all seek. And then even things like when we get to Mina, and then we do the Rajm, what are we saying? We're declaring that the enemy of Allah is our enemy with the shaitan. It's a clear declaration. And in that sense also, it ties in the familial aspect of Islam, that Sayyidina Ismail and Sayyidina Hajar and Sayyidina Ibrahim, they all did that same thing. The shaitan tried to play games with them. He tried to deviate them off the path, but they were strong enough to connect to Allah Azza wa Jal, and we're emulating that. And then also the dhabiha, the udhiyah, that we're slaughtering. It's a sacrifice to Allah. We're saying to Allah, what you have is better than what we have. Ya Allah, we're ready to give the best of what we have for the best of what you have in terms of rewards for us and His rida. That's the best thing we can get of Allah, the pleasure of Allah. And the cutting of the hair or the shaving of the hair for men. We're supposed to, the person whose Hajj is accepted is supposed to be like the day that they were born. And so the cutting of the hair, the shaving in particular, is symbolic of that. When babies are born, some have little bits of hair, but they don't have a full head of hair. So it's supposed to be symbolic of these things, that a new life is given to that individual, a new spiritual life, and even a new physical life, because the drinking of Zamzam, you're supposed to drink Zamzam until you feel like it's going to come out of your body. That's what the Prophet said. So it's a physical cleansing as well. And then not only that, put these things together, that we spend our money to be in perpetual worship of Allah. Because when you go to Hajj, that's what you do. If you're doing it properly anyway. You go to worship. You don't want to leave the haram. You go to the haram, whether it's in Medina, which we'll talk about next week, or it's in Mecca. You don't want to leave. All you want to do is worship and pray and look at the Kaaba. And every time you see the Kaaba, you're free. You're amazed. And you go back to your hotel room, and what do? You turn on the TV and you watch the Kaaba. And you're like, at home, you can't watch it. It's boring. But when you're there, you can't get enough of it, because the state's changed. The one's spiritual state, condition, and one's priorities and intentions and goals in life has changed. And these are the things we're supposed to grab onto. It's not just the physical. If you look at it physically, it's just all about stones. You go there, you go stand on a stone or a rock, which is Arafat, and you go around a stone, which is the Kaaba. That's all it is. And then you go throw stones at stones when you do the Rajm. That's the physical outward manifestation of it. But the internal spiritual illumination and manifestation of it is far greater than that, because the whole thing's symbolic. So that symbolism, the symbolism of the Hajj, has to be reflected in our hearts, has to be reflected in our minds, and has to be reflected in our personages, in other words, in our bodies and in our character. And if it is, then we have that continual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A continual connection, that what's Hajj in the Arabic, the meaning of the Arabic word is qasd, a resolve. So it's a resolve to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. It's a resolve to be near Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and to understand Him. And so that symbolism that's in the Hajj, the quality of it comes in that resolution that we have to be near and to be close to Allah and illuminated by the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam.